Unit 2, Class in American History. The concept of class in American history is a series of progression and digression. Social class in the U.S. is a concept that began when the settlers first arrived in North America. It can be defined as a group of individuals who share the same socio-economic status, according to Britannica. Throughout the course of American history, social class has always been important. As we look back on the centuries, it becomes apparent that the idea of social class and status is one of power and in many cases greed. While there will always be a tug of war within the classes, as time has progressed, there appears that class differences are less predominant. Eric Lott's essay, Class, is a discussion of social class in America. He argues that in the U.S., its citizens are not assigned classes per se, rather they are provided with opportunities to work hard and climb up the social class ladder. Lott characterizes class in America as most citizens looking for social mobility. While some are able to successfully obtain it, others are limited due to class structure and class consciousness. Each class has its own interests and agendas, and it is up to those within the class to address the problems and implement solutions. Although many in the lower and middle classes are trying to move up in class position, there are limitations in climbing up the structure. These limitations can include lack of education, money, and status in general. While not impossible, it is difficult to move up the class structure, so many do what they can within their given formation to advance the interests of the class. The experience of an indentured servant titled "Our Plantation is Very Weak" supports this discussion on class hierarchy. An excerpt from this letter states, "Planters in early 17th century Virginia had bountiful amounts of land and a profitable crop in tobacco, but they needed labor to till their fields. They faced resistance from the local Indian people and were unable to enslave them, so they recruited poor English adults as servants. During this time, they were unable to bring the locals from the surrounding areas to work, and they realized they would lose business and money. This resulted in the planters seeking individuals from those in a lower class to work for them." Jacob Riis's How the Other Half Lives is a description of the deplorable conditions in New York City slums. Many New Yorkers lived in poverty, and because of their inability to afford better housing, they were given housing that consisted of overcrowding, unhygienic, and unsafe conditions. He states, "The half that was on top cared little for the struggles, and less for the fate of those who were underneath, so long as it was able to hold them there and keep its own seat. It wasn't until the issue of increasing poverty and overcrowding began to affect the upper class that they realized something needed to be done. It was not until the 1930s that the government became involved in providing public housing to those in need. These housing projects were built as large compounds, taking up large space with numerous buildings and apartments. Additionally, in 19th century New York City, there was not only a division in social class, but also a divide based on the country you immigrated from. For example, the Irish were considered low class and had a reputation for being drunk and disorderly. The Irish Times writes, "The Irish might have fled from oppression, poverty, and hunger, but perceived as importing disease, popery, and intemperance, they were not warmly welcomed. There was even conflict within those of the same social class." In our current times, a hierarchy still exists in our society. However, it is not as it was in the past. The lines of divide are not as apparent. Most Americans are middle class. The classes are further divided into upper middle, middle, and lower middle class. Based on the data from the Urban Institute in 2014, the rich only controlled 11% of the total income. The middle class has now become the majority. However, views on middle class can vary based on location. Some states require a lower cost of living versus other states who have a higher cost of living. Furthermore, class can also be affected by the economy, as evidenced by the U.S. Great Depression of the 1920s. According to our digital history text, the Great Depression was the worst economic catastrophe in American history. It hit urban and rural areas, blue and white-collar families alike. In the nation's cities, unemployed men took to the streets to sell apples or to shine shoes. Everyone from the rich to the poor were affected, creating a social decay. We can see that over the course of American history, the concept of class has developed and been based on political and economic status. Social class can be seen as a hierarchy of affluence and greed, and is not only seen in the context of economic status, but can also be a divide between races and ethnicities.